Now we're going to get to domestic news. Supreme Court is weighing on a judge's power on policies nationwide in birthright citizenship cases. Now, the reason why the Supreme Court is weighing on this hyper-specific angle on birthright citizenship is because tackling the issue of birthright citizenship directly is a bridge too far that even Trump's legal team understands would be declared unconstitutional instantly. So for that reason, they are trying to undermine the power of lower courts on actions that they declare are taken by the federal government. This is a Supreme Court case that is supposed to be about whether or not the federal government can take away birthright citizenship, which is unconstitutional. Because they can't directly tackle that issue, because even the supermajority conservative Supreme Court would obviously look at that and go, this is unconstitutional, get out of here. They've decided that the angle that they can tackle the issue on is by way of seeing if district courts have the power to issue injunctions and to stop the federal government from engaging in unconstitutional actions.
The details of the case involve President Trump's executive order to restrict which children born in the U.S. can be U.S. citizens, also known as birthright citizenship.
What is your concern if the court says no nationwide injunctions?
Well, then you're going to have lawsuits effectively filed in every single state. It's going to tie up the courts, and individuals may lose their protections under the Constitution if that happens.
The Obama and Biden administrations opposed national injunctions, arguing judges in conservative states like Texas, where opponents chose to file lawsuits, were dictating national policy. Now the shoe is on the other foot. West Virginia Attorney General J.B. McCuskey says that shows why it's a problem when these rulings apply nationwide.
People begin to look at circuit judges as an extension of the political process. And that is fundamentally disastrous for the way that the public views the...
What are you talking about? It's a part of the separation of powers. I don't think there's any legal claim here. I don't think there's any valid legal claim here, okay? Like, the idea that you can literally undermine the power of the judicial force in this country, the power of the courts here, because you want to expand the powers of the executive is ridiculous. It is also unconstitutional in and of itself. I don't even think the Supreme Court will go in this direction because it also defangs the Supreme Court. It defangs the entirety of the justice system and its power. Yeah, which is why you're seeing people freaking out over this, by the way. SCOTUS betrayal. Amy Coney Barrett slams Trump's legal team on birthright citizenship executive order, siding with liberal Kagan. What do you really think? Should women be allowed on the Supreme Court? And it's not just Amy Coney Barrett either. Brett Kavanaugh has also criticized this too. Like, the only time you'll get some motion on this is probably like Clarence Thomas, you know? And even then, I don't know. I mean, this is yet another instance where we are going to find out if there is any sort of power left in the Supreme Court or the judicial system, or if they are going to completely defang it. It makes no sense.
Partiality and the power of our court system.
Disastrous.
But can't they just reverse this when a Democrat gets in the White House? Beautiful take, El Duderino. When is that going to happen, you think? How is that going to happen, you think? You think there will be ever another moment where Democrats come back to power after this? I just don't know.
Why?
Because the court is nothing if it doesn't have its integrity.
Am I living in crazy town right now? Is Kavanaugh really the voice of reason on this issue right now? These guys are doing everything in their power to completely gut the institutions until they can rebuild them. And that is going to be the second phase of this. First, you destroy the legitimacy of the courts, or you defang the power that the courts have, considering that most of their power is just persuasive to begin with. And if you don't follow their persuasive power, then, you know, what can the courts do? They don't have an army. And then they change the rules and they start rewriting the rules to make it legal, to make their actions legal. Okay, this is how it works. We haven't reached, at least for a lot of the Trump administration's agenda, we have not reached the Nuremberg race laws moment yet. But that is where this is headed. First, they defang the courts. Then they change the rules and make their actions legal and make it illegal to resist. And then they use the courts to process every single person expeditiously and within the confines of the new American legal structure. And this has happened throughout history, obviously. It's one of the most famous examples of this is slavery, right? A perfectly legal process. It was illegal to free slaves. It was legal to have slaves. Okay, just like in Nazi Germany, it was illegal to be Jewish, and that Jews and other political dissidents and other minority groups were considered non-citizens. They were effectively removed from citizenship, which is ironically exactly what the Trump administration is trying to do. And resisting against that was illegal. We have not reached that level yet, but I fear that eventually we will. Wait, so the court isn't ruling on the order is legal? They're just ruling on whether or not the lower courts can block it? Yes. It's legal trickery, which Republicans love doing all the time. This decision is not whether or not the Trump administration can, by executive mandate, by executive order, just decide to abolish birthright citizenship. This is not the Supreme Court issuing a decision on the constitutionality of birthright citizenship. This is the Supreme Court issuing a decision on whether or not federal judges can issue injunctions at the state level that impacts the executive orders, like stop executive orders at the federal level. And their argument is that, you got woke judges in woke states that basically are operating as political operatives and undermining the goals of the democratically elected right-wing government. Except if federal judges were not allowed to issue injunctions against the executive authority, against the federal government, then they have no power whatsoever. Like, that's kind of the point. Also, the woke judges that they're talking about are like Reagan appointees. These are conservative judges as well. Like, the people that they're considering activist judges are quite literally activist judges, but in the opposite direction. Like, they were appointed as activist judges for the right. They just still happen to believe in maintaining some aspects of the Constitution.
Exchange where she drew an analogy to what if the next president, a new president, issued an executive order banning ownership of guns. She asked if the court would have to, quote, sit back and...
Well, why defang the courts? They control the legislative branch. Why not change the law now? What do you mean? The reason why they want to defang the courts is because the courts are the last bastion of defense. The Republican Party's 40-year project has been to undermine the legislative body through gridlock, through permanent obstruction. They recognized, especially after Mitch McConnell's takeover under the Obama administration, they realized that they wouldn't even get punished by their voters for consistently engaging in obstruction. Political parties are totally polarized at this point. It doesn't matter. Their base of support cares about ridiculous nonsense like culture war issues and whatnot. They don't care about anything else. And therefore, there is no power in Congress. So a lot of these decisions that, I guess, de facto change legislation without actually changing federal legislation comes from the state legislatures, which are much easier to dominate through gerrymandering. So they oftentimes will take unconstitutional decisions or ridiculous right-wing bills and present it at the state level. And then at the state level, the only way to combat these decisions is through the justice system. But the justice system is still an independent body within the separation of powers. So they've already destroyed the power that Congress has effectively. And now they legislate by state legislatures. And now the only way to stop state legislatures is in the hands of the justice system. So that's the last hurdle that they have to clear. So they're now trying to defang the power of the courts. They are, on the one hand, packing the courts, but on the other, they're still getting injunctions issued against them. So they have to also defang the courts in the interim, only to turn around and I guess like completely rebuild the courts in their own vision. But they haven't gotten there yet. A lot of this makes sense when you realize that Republicans don't care about the institutions or the preservation of institutions. They just want to wield power. Their understanding of politics is more sincere and more ruthless and more brutally honest than the liberal Democrat Party's approach is. The Democratic Party's approach is about preserving the sanctity of institutions. They have this ridiculous notion that people care about this sort of thing when playing the game of politics. Politics is not about that. Politics is about power. It's about distribution of resources. It's about who gets to do violence and who are the targets of said violence, who gets to have the resources and who doesn't get to have the resources. That's how politics works. And Republicans understand that. And they actually do have the capacity to build on a vision that will solidify power at the top, at the executive. knowing full well that the Democrats, once they are in power, will never wield the executive authority in the same way that Republicans do. And if you want to consolidate power at the executive, you have to take care of all of the hurdles that come your way. And part of that is going to be, in the separation of powers, the courts. It's that simple. Yes, effectively a dictatorship.
Wait for individuals to sue one by one to challenge the constitutionality for such an order.
Jeff, sometimes the justices and the way they ask their questions, they show a little bit of how they're feeling about a particular issue. Do you see that in the questions we're seeing so far from the justices?
Yeah, not as to the merits, but as to the leanings towards a nationwide injunction. I count at least 3 justices, Sotomayor, Kagan, and Jackson, who are hostile to any attack on nationwide injunctions, and maybe Barrett. The question is, will there be 5 justices who are willing to strike down nationwide injunctions in this case or in general?
Selena, and I know you're watching some protests outside the court. What are you hearing from demonstrators there?
Yeah, Diane, not too far from where we are now, outside of the Supreme Court, there's a group of protesters, and I spoke to folks who traveled from across the country, including a sizable group that came from California, and they're protesting not only the administration's stance on birthright citizenship, but also the president's immigration and deportation plans overall. Now, I spoke to one young woman who is the daughter of undocumented migrants. She said this case, of course, hits at home. She said she wants to be here to send a message that they all have a voice.
We love the United States, and we've been working here for so many years. We've been able to help other communities in our surrounding areas for little to nothing back, any benefits at all. To me, I'm proud to say that I'm a daughter of immigrant parents, the first in my family to go to university, first to graduate from high school as well, second in my class, and I'm proud to say that my sister is the valedictorian in my class as well. So we are living proof that we've been able to do great things coming to this country to not only provide for ourselves, but to provide to other people.
And we heard the justices ask some of the procedural and logistical questions. Immigration advocates are arguing that if this nationwide injunction is narrowed, that it could cause some real chaos on the ground, because there could be a situation where kids born in some states are considered U.S. citizens, but in other states they are not. So you could see a case of families trying to get to states where their newborn child will be considered U.S. citizens, and that could create overwhelmed hospitals along the border and questions about paperwork, regulations. A lot is up in the air.
All right, Selena Wang, Jeff Lewis, thank you both.